On a spring evening in April, the cities of Renton and Seattle moved at their usual pace. Traffic lights cycling, storefronts glowing, crowds drifting towards stadium lights. For Ingrid Marie Lyne, it was meant to be an ordinary night. A first date. A few hours away from responsibility. A moment of adult normalcy after years devoted almost entirely to her children. She told her daughters she'd be back later. She left her home with no indication that this night would be different from any other, but she never returned. At first, there was no alarm. Adults disappear briefly all the time. Phones die, plans change, mornings arrive late. But as the hours passed, concern settled in quietly. By the time police were alerted, the question was no longer where Ingrid had gone, but why her absence felt wrong. Days later, hundreds of miles from reassurance, the city of Seattle would reveal an answer no one was prepared for. Inside municipal recycling containers, investigators discovered human remains, separated, concealed, and deliberately discarded. Forensic analysis would confirm what Ingrid's family already feared. The remains belonged to her. The search for a missing woman had become something far darker. What began as a date, an ordinary choice made by millions every day, would expose a crime that shocked a region and left 3 children without their mother. This is not a story about recklessness. It is a story about trust, about vulnerability, and about how violence can hide behind the most familiar moments. This is the story of Ingrid Lyne. Before the investigation, before the headlines, before the courtroom, there was a life. Ingrid Marie Lyne was a registered nurse, a mother of 3 daughters, and a graduate of the University of Arizona. She was known by friends and family as disciplined, compassionate, and deeply committed to her children. Nursing was not just a profession for Ingrid, it was an extension of who she was. Caring for others was routine. Responsibility was constant. After her divorce, Ingrid focused on rebuilding stability. She was described as a woman balancing long work shifts, parenting responsibilities, and the quiet pressure of starting over in midlife. She was cautious. She was deliberate. And like many single parents, she rarely placed herself first. The events that followed her disappearance would soon reduce her name to headlines and legal filings. But this story does not begin with a crime. It begins with a woman who was present in her children's lives, every day. What you are about to hear is drawn from the public record. From police affidavits. From court proceedings. From verified reporting that documented each step of this case as it unfolded. Some moments are reconstructed for clarity, not to dramatize, but to understand sequence and context. The details of this case are difficult. They involve violence, loss, and acts intended to erase a human life. These details are shared not for shock, but for truth. This documentary is based on publicly available court records, law enforcement statements, and verified news reporting. All events described are drawn from official sources. Some scenes are reconstructed for narrative clarity. Viewer discretion is advised due to the sensitive and disturbing nature of the case. This is the case of Ingrid Lyne. After years defined by responsibility, routine, and resilience, Ingrid Marie Lyne began to consider something quietly personal: companionship. She was no stranger to independence. Public accounts describe a woman who managed long nursing shifts, parenting, and daily logistics with precision. But like many people rebuilding after divorce, Ingrid understood that life could hold space for more than obligation. She turned to online dating, not impulsively, not recklessly, but cautiously. Friends later told investigators that Ingrid was selective. She asked questions. She paid attention. In early 2016, she connected with a man named John Robert Charlton. For nearly a month, the relationship existed only through messages. Conversations exchanged late at night, between shifts, between parenting responsibilities. There was no immediate meeting. No rush. To Ingrid, this was how safety was built, through time, through familiarity, through perceived consistency. What she could not see was what public records would later reveal. Charlton had a criminal history that included robbery, assault, and time spent in prison. These were facts unavailable to Ingrid through a dating profile or casual conversation. There is no indication in that Ingrid knew the full extent of this past. There is no evidence she ignored warning signs, only that she lacked access to information that would later become central to the case. Online, Charlton presented himself as attentive, available, interested. For someone accustomed to putting others first, this attention felt ordinary, even reassuring. The decision to meet in person did not come lightly. Ingrid arranged her schedule carefully. She made sure her daughters were safe. She chose a public setting. This was not secrecy. It was structure. Millions of people make this choice every day, to trust cautiously, to hope reasonably, and to believe that an ordinary moment can remain ordinary. For Ingrid, this step into dating was not a gamble. It was an act of normalcy. 1 month of messages led to one evening out. A baseball game. Stadium lights. Crowds. Noise. Nothing about the plan suggested danger. And yet, this was the moment where two lives intersected, one moving forward, the other carrying a past that would soon surface in the most devastating way. Friday, April 8, 2016, began like countless other days in Renton. For Ingrid Marie Rounceville Lyne, the day was carefully structured. She arranged childcare first, dropping her daughters off at their father's home. It was a routine decision, made with the same care that shaped most of her life. Only after her children were settled did Ingrid turn her attention to the evening ahead. She was meeting John Robert Charlton in person for the first time. The plan was simple. A baseball game. A public venue. Thousands of people. Noise, lights, and visibility. The setting was Suffolk Field, home of the Seattle Mariners. It was opening season. Fans filled the stands. Vendors moved through aisles. The night carried the energy of anticipation, the kind that feels harmless, communal, safe. Ingrid appears ordinary, calm, unhurried. There is nothing in her posture or movement that suggests fear. This matters. Because when cases are reconstructed, investigators look for deviation, moments where behavior changes, where something feels wrong. On this night, nothing stood out. Ingrid and Charlton watched the game together among thousands of strangers. They ate. They talked. They blended into the crowd. For Ingrid, this was the outcome she had planned for: a public meeting, a controlled environment, a normal evening. There is no evidence of an argument at the stadium. No report of distress. No indication that this night would end differently than intended. At some point after the game, Ingrid left with Charlton. This is the last confirmed sighting of her alive. The shift did not happen under stadium lights. It did not happen in public view. It happened later, away from crowds, away from witnesses, away from the safety Ingrid had deliberately chosen. Millions of people attend sporting events every year. Millions leave safely. For Ingrid, that ordinary transition, from public to private, marked the moment where control quietly slipped away. No alarms sounded. No one intervened. The city moved on, unaware that one life had just crossed into its final hours. Disappearances rarely announce themselves. They begin quietly, with routines left unfinished. When Ingrid Marie Rounceville Lyne failed to return home after the baseball game, there was no immediate panic. Adults run late. Phones lose signal. Nights extend into mornings. But morning came, and Ingrid did not. She missed obligations she never missed. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. For a mother who structured her life around consistency, the silence was not just unusual, it was alarming. Family members began to retrace her last known movements. They knew she had attended a game in Seattle. They knew she had planned to come home. They knew she would never disappear willingly. As concern escalated, the question shifted from "Where is Ingrid?" to "Why hasn't she checked in?" Police were notified. A missing person report was filed. In the early stages of an investigation, time matters, not because answers are immediate, but because patterns form quickly. Investigators began reconstructing Ingrid's timeline. They examined her phone activity, her financial records, her last known contacts. The data told a story of abrupt interruption. There were no outgoing messages after the date, no banking activity, no movement consistent with travel or voluntary absence. To detectives, this absence of activity was evidence in itself. Ingrid's vehicle was located, but Ingrid was not. That distinction changed the tone of the investigation. When a car is found without its owner, the disappearance becomes physical, tangible, no longer theoretical. Investigators interviewed friends, co-workers, and family members. Everyone told the same story: Ingrid was reliable, predictable, present. She had plans, responsibilities, children waiting for her. There was no indication of distress shared beforehand, no farewell. As hours became days, the search intensified. The case expanded from concern to fear. Detectives revisited the last confirmed sighting, the Mariners game. They reviewed footage. They confirmed companions. They narrowed their focus. One name appeared consistently in the timeline: John Robert Charlton. He was the last person known to be with Ingrid. This fact alone did not imply guilt, but it demanded attention. In missing person cases, proximity matters. Last contact matters. Silence matters. While investigators worked, Ingrid's family lived in suspension, caught between hope and dread. Every phone call carried possibility. Every hour without news deepened the fear. The disappearance was no longer just a logistical problem. It was emotional, urgent. And beneath the surface, the case was already shifting, from search to suspicion. Because when a mother vanishes without explanation, the truth is rarely gentle. And somewhere in Seattle, the answer was already waiting to be found. The search for a missing person always carries two possibilities: reunion or revelation. In early April 2016, investigators and Ingrid's family were still hoping for the first. But the city was about to deliver the second. In Seattle, a routine process unfolded, one repeated thousands of times each day. A sanitation worker opened a recycling container. Nothing unusual at first. Nothing that suggested what was inside. Then something was seen that didn't belong. The discovery was immediate, disturbing, unmistakable. Authorities were called. The area was secured, and the search for a missing woman took a devastating turn. Human remains had been found inside a recycling bin. At first, there was no name attached to the discovery, only evidence. Evidence that required patience, science, and confirmation. Forensic teams worked methodically. Each step followed protocol. Each finding documented. It did not take long for investigators to understand the scale of what they were dealing with. The remains were identified as belonging to Ingrid Marie Lyne. For her family, hope collapsed into certainty. The missing person case was officially reclassified as a homicide investigation. Details emerged slowly, and with restraint. Law enforcement confirmed that Ingrid had been killed, and that efforts had been made to conceal the crime. Authorities withheld specific forensic information from the public, not out of secrecy, but out of necessity. In cases like this, facts are released carefully. Each detail has consequences. Each statement must withstand scrutiny in court. The community reacted with shock. This was not a random tragedy in a distant place. It was close, familiar, unsettling. Ingrid was not a stranger. She was a nurse, a mother, someone who had spent her career caring for others. The contrast between who she was and how she was found was impossible to reconcile. Media coverage intensified, but investigators remained focused. The discovery was not an ending, it was a beginning. Now there was a crime scene, physical evidence, a trail that could be followed. And with that trail came urgency. Because when someone goes to the effort of hiding a body, it speaks to intent, to planning, to consciousness of guilt. The question was no longer what happened to Ingrid. The question became, who did this, and how long had they been preparing to do it? As detectives expanded their investigation, one truth became unavoidable. This was not a crime of chance. And the person responsible had not disappeared. They were still out there, living their life, while Ingrid's had been taken. The horrifying discovery had answered one question, and opened many more. Once Ingrid had been found, the investigation no longer moved outward. It moved inward. Detectives returned to what they had always known, the last confirmed hours of Ingrid Marie Lyne's life. Her phone records, her movements, her final communications. Every homicide investigation begins with the same principle: start where the victim stopped. That place was the date. Ingrid's last known companion was John Robert Charlton, the man she had met online, spoken to for weeks, and finally agreed to meet in person. This fact alone did not determine guilt, but it defined priority. Detectives examined Charlton's version of events. He told investigators that after the Mariners game, the two went their separate ways. But evidence does not respond to explanations. It responds to facts. Surveillance footage, cell phone data, and vehicle movement painted a different picture, one that placed Ingrid with Charlton far beyond the stadium. Her phone activity ended abruptly. Her car was seen being driven, not by her. These were not coincidences. Investigators searched Charlton's residence. There, they found evidence that tied Ingrid directly to the space, physical traces that could not be explained away by chance or misunderstanding. This was no longer circumstantial. This was connective. Charlton's criminal history came into focus: prior convictions for violent offenses, time spent in prison, a documented pattern of aggression. To detectives, this history did not prove the crime. But it explained capacity. As the timeline tightened, so did the pressure. Charlton was interviewed again. His statements shifted. Details blurred. Gaps widened. At one point, he claimed to have blacked out. In criminal investigations, such claims are neither rare nor persuasive. Because blackouts do not move bodies. They do not transport vehicles. They do not dispose of evidence across the city. The pieces aligned. Ingrid's disappearance, the location of her remains, the movements of her car, and Charlton's access to all three. This was no longer a question of if. It was a question of when the arrest would come. Charlton was taken into custody. For investigators, the moment brought no satisfaction, only confirmation. The case had narrowed from a citywide search to a single suspect, and the evidence was no longer pointing outward. It was pointing directly at him. What remained was not discovery, but accountability. When the investigation ended, the story did not. It simply moved into a room where every word would be recorded. Under oath. Under scrutiny. Under consequence. Following his arrest, John Robert Charlton was questioned about the final hours of Ingrid Marie Lyne's life. His explanations were fragmented, at times vague, at times contradictory. He claimed memory loss. He said he had blacked out. He suggested he could not recall key moments that investigators had already reconstructed with data. In courtrooms, such claims are not evaluated by emotion, they are tested against evidence. And the evidence did not forget. Prosecutors laid out a timeline supported by cell phone records, surveillance footage, and physical findings. It showed Ingrid's movements ending, and Charlton's continuing. It showed effort, decisions, actions taken after the killing. These were not the behaviors of confusion. They were the behaviors of concealment. As the case progressed, Charlton faced charges including first-degree murder. A trial would have required Ingrid's family to relive every detail, to hear each moment dissected aloud. Instead, a different path emerged. Charlton entered a guilty plea. With that plea, there would be no jury deliberation, no cross-examination of witnesses, No alternate version of events presented as possibility. The facts would stand as established. In court, Charlton acknowledged responsibility for Ingrid's death. There was no explanation that could restore what had been taken. No statement that could balance the scale. For Ingrid's family, the courtroom was not a place of closure, it was a place of confirmation. Confirmation that the worst fears they had carried were true. Confirmation that Ingrid had trusted someone who ultimately chose violence. At sentencing, the court considered the severity of the crime, the evidence of planning, and Charlton's prior criminal history. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, measured not in years alone, but in finality. For the justice system, the case reached resolution. For the family, resolution meant something else entirely. It meant learning to live with a truth that could never be undone. The courtroom emptied. The record was sealed. And Ingrid's name remained, not as a case number, but as a life that mattered. When the courtroom doors closed, the case was over. But for Ingrid's family, the story did not end there. The sentence delivered by the court did not return what had been lost. It only marked the beginning of a different kind of reckoning. Ingrid Marie Rounceville Lyne was more than a headline. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. Her 3 daughters were left to grow up without her presence, without her voice guiding them through ordinary moments that suddenly felt impossibly large. Ingrid's family described a woman defined not by the way she died, but by the way she lived. She was remembered as steady, kind, devoted. A nurse who spent her career caring for strangers, and a mother who built her life around showing up for her children. The violence that ended her life forced her loved ones into a reality they never asked for, one shaped by absence. Grief did not arrive all at once. It arrived in fragments, moments when her phone no longer rang, when holidays felt quieter, when the future no longer matched the plans she had made. Beyond the family, the case reverberated outward. Ingrid's murder prompted renewed conversations about online dating safety, about the unseen risks that can exist behind carefully curated profiles and long conversations. Law enforcement and advocacy groups emphasized what this case illustrated so starkly. That trust, while human and necessary, can sometimes be exploited. That criminal histories do not always present themselves openly. And that violence often hides behind normalcy. Ingrid's story became part of a larger conversation about vulnerability, accountability, and awareness. Not as a cautionary tale meant to inspire fear, but as a reminder that safety is never guaranteed, even in ordinary moments. For her family, the lessons were not abstract. They were personal. Every day forward would be shaped by remembrance. By honoring who Ingrid was, not through the details of the crime, but through the life she lived before it. And in that remembrance, her family carried something forward. Not closure, but resilience. In the end, this case is not defined by how it concluded in court. It is defined by what came before, and what remains after. Ingrid Marie Rounceville Lyne lived an ordinary life in the best sense of the word. She worked. She cared for others. She loved her children. She trusted that an evening out would be just that, an evening. There was no reckless choice. No extraordinary risk. Only the simple human act of believing that normal moments are safe. This is why her story resonates so deeply. Because nothing about her final day looked dangerous. And yet, it ended in irreversible harm. The justice system did what it could. It identified responsibility. It delivered punishment. But justice, in its truest form, cannot restore a life. It cannot return a mother to her daughters. What it can do is bear witness. Witness to the truth. Witness to the harm caused. And witness to the fact that Ingrid's life mattered. In telling this story, we do not seek fear. We seek remembrance. And we seek accountability, not only in courtrooms, but in how we look out for one another. Because the most unsettling truth of this case is also the simplest. Violence does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind the appearance of normalcy. And sometimes, The only thing we can do afterward is tell the story, honestly, carefully, and with respect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe.